Okay, welcome to part 2 of the video on creating off-canvas menu effects with Oxygen. So in part 1 we got the menu to slide out from the left, the canvas to slide over to the right. In part 2 we're going to make this 3D. We're going to put some finishing touches on it, like fading out the actual page content when the canvas is moved over to the right. So first let's do the 3D effect. So we'll go over to the style sheet, and what we're going to do is rotate the canvas around the y-axis. So we're going to go rotate y 25 degrees. And right now it doesn't look like much of a rotation, and that's because we don't have any perspective on the page container. So what we're going to do is go to the page container and put perspective 1000 pixels on the page container. That's going to basically make it simulate that your eye is 1000 pixels away from the center of this page container, and that's going to create the 3D effect. So that doesn't look so good, so let's tweak this a little bit. So instead of 25 degrees, let's go negative 25 degrees. Okay, that's a bit better. And let's change the background color of the page container from white to something dark in line with the color scheme of the site. So let's go maybe a dark bluish gray. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now the problem is the background is coming through the canvas, so we'll just go to the canvas and set the background color to white. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now we got a nice 3D effect on the page canvas. Now what we want to do is darken the page and make it impossible to scroll. We want to kind of fade it out. So to do that, we're going to use the after pseudo element on the canvas. So we'll go to Canvas, After, and what we're going to do is just create a full width black background that covers up the entire canvas. So position, absolute, left 0, top 0, width 100%, height 100%, background color black, opacity 0.5. Okay, so now we've faded it out, but we only want this fade out effect to apply when the menu's open. So what we're going to do actually is copy and paste the width, height, and opacity, set it to no width, no height, and fully transparent when the menu is in the default state. And then when the canvas is rotated, when the menu is open, we'll go menu open dot canvas after, and we'll just copy and paste in those values from before. Okay, and that fades it out when the menu is open. Now we want that fade out to be a smooth transition. Right now it just lights on, lights out. We want sort of a dimming effect. So the way we're going to do that is with creative use of the transition property. So right here we're just going to go transition opacity 0.5 seconds. So now when it is dimming, it'll take 0.5 seconds, half a second to dim. But now we have to undim it in 0.5 seconds as well. So to do that, we'll go back to the container, go to the after state for the container, and we're going to add a transition property. Back to the container, after, and we're going to add a transition for the opacity of 0.5 seconds. And then we also need to wait to resize it to a width of 0 and a height of 0, because if we just resize it to a width and height of 0 immediately, it will just disappear. We won't get the fade out effect. So what we're going to do is use the transition delay property. So the way we do that is we say width. We want it to get to 0 immediately, so 0-second transition, but then half a second transition delay. So this is going to give it half a second to fade out, and then set the width of this overlay back to 0. And we're going to do the same on the height. Height 0-second transition, 5-second transition delay. And now it should fade in and out nicely. Okay, let's save this, take a look on the front end, and then I'll come back and we'll get creative with the 3D effects. Okay, looks pretty good. And as you see, you can't actually scroll this anymore because the overlay is stopping the mouse events from going through. You can't mouse over these buttons. It basically freezes the page and dims it, and you can only access the menu. And the only reason we get the scroll effect right now on the page is because of this admin bar. If your users were actually looking at this, or you disabled the admin bar, the page wouldn't scroll at all. It would just be locked in place. So that looks pretty good. Now let's do a 3D effect on the menu. So to do that, what we'll do is go over to the menu, and the initial state of the menu, we will rotate it along the y-axis, let's say 90 degrees. And you can't see that right now because the menu is open. But if we close the menu, you can see it kind of rotate out. And if we open the menu now, it's going to rotate in because we have that transition property for all. So that's kind of a cool 3D effect right there. This kind of moves over to the right, and the menu kind of zooms in. Now let's say we wanted to maybe zoom this out a little bit as well, make it a little less prominent when the menu's open. We could go back to the canvas. I should say we could go back to the canvas setting over here, and right now we're moving the canvas 300 pixels to the right. We can also move it back along the z-index. We can move it back, let's say 500 pixels when the menu's open. And the smaller we want it to be, the further we could move it back. And now it's not quite far enough to the right, so we could move it maybe a little further to the right, 400 pixels to the right. That's a cool effect right there. Another thing we might want to do to the menu is actually make the menu sort of float a little bit. So we'll add some margin on all sides of the menu. And then instead of having its height be 100, we'll set its height to auto. Okay, that's a pretty cool effect right there. That's a pretty cool 3D effect. Let me show you a couple more 3D effects you can do. Let's go back to the menu. Go back to 100 VH, ditch the margin, go back to the canvas, ditch the rotate Y effect. Okay, now let's say we wanted to rotate the menu backwards sort of around this axis right here. So imagine the menu's like a flag on a flagpole, and the flagpole is this border between the menu and the canvas. So we want to rotate the canvas, say, around this axis. And we want to rotate it sort of backwards. So to do that, what we do is, again, we're going to rotate it along the y-axis. Rotate y, say, 25 degrees. But the problem here is it's rotating it along the center of the canvas. We want it to rotate it along this axis right here. So the way we're going to do that is set the transform origin. The transform origin is the point at which the element is rotated around. So we want it to be rotated around an imaginary flagpole right here. So we're going to set the x origin to 0, and then since we're rotating it about the y-axis, it doesn't really matter what we set the y-axis to. We could set it to 0, we could set it to 50%, which I think is the default. It does not matter. And now it will rotate around that axis. So that's a pretty cool effect right there. Okay, hopefully this gives you some inspiration and ideas to create your own off-canvas 3D menu effects. Thank you for watching.